Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of the Bagdal Plus podcast. It's been a while since my last episode. In fact, it's been 3 months, and the last time I talked about robot journalism with Hannah. Now, that was the most popular episode I've ever made. In case you haven't heard it, I interviewed a robot about the future of robot journalism, and people loved it so much that they started asking me when Hannah, the robot, would come back. So that was really fun, and yes, Hannah might return someday. But today we are going to talk about something completely different. We are going to talk about the amazing world of unit economics and unit analytics. I know unit economics sounds really boring to a lot of people, but it is an extremely important thing for publishers to embrace. Not just on the business side, where you're hopefully already using it, but much more so on the newsroom side. We will talk about why this is so amazing, how others are doing it, and also talk about the many problems that we have with it. So as always, put on your comfiest shoes and go for a nice walk, and, well, let's get to it. Let's start by defining what unit economics really is. Well, it's the metric that you use to define the value of each individual thing that you do. For journalism, this is usually about the articles that we write. Unit economics defines how much revenue a specific article made, not on average, but the actual real revenue for that specific article. Measuring this is not really that hard. There are usually 2 types of revenue: advertising and subscriptions. Subscription revenue is calculated as a share of the activity. Think about something like Spotify. The way they pay artists is to look at how many plays or time spent that each individual song achieved, and then they use that metric to divide the total revenue for each song. To calculate advertising revenue, you simply look up this data, because every publisher is already measuring this. And this is a very simple metric to track. Or just look at how YouTube does it, where in the YouTube analytics dashboard, every creator can see exactly how much revenue each video made. So measuring this is really simple, and everyone else is already doing it. In fact, if you are a YouTuber, checking the unit economics is something most do on a daily basis. Many even do it several times per day. Not only that, but all the successful YouTubers spend a long time looking into the details of this. In my newsletter a couple of weeks ago, I highlighted Shelby Church, who is one such person. She has posted a video explaining how YouTube advertising works, and I will link to this in the transcript for this podcast, which you can then find on my site. But when you watch the video, you can see how deeply she is looking at her analytics to better understand how and why she is making money. Let me give you an example. Here is a short quote from what she said in her video.
So it recently occurred to me that the general public has no accurate concept of how much YouTubers make from the ads placed on their videos. And today I'm going to expose exactly how much 1 million views can make you from a YouTube video. So here's the interesting thing about making money on YouTube. You can have several different videos with 1 million views that make very different amounts. So let's take this video, for example, gymnastics then versus now. It got 1.3 million views, and we can see it earned about $2,000. So had this video only gotten 1 million views, it only would have made like $1,400. Let's take a look at another one. So this video has 2.2 million views. So I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, all right, this one probably made like $4,000. You guys are gonna be shocked at how much this made, because I was. So this video, 2.2 million views, it only made $743. $743. Why is that, you think? Well, let's see here. So the reason for this is this video is pretty short, so it's only running 1 commercial pre-roll ad. The real reason this video didn't earn that much money It's because most of the views are actually from outside the US. So you earn different amounts of money based on where your viewer is from. It's kind of weird, I know, but it's just based on what advertisers pay. You also earn a different amount based on the age of your viewers. So when we really dive into what's going on here, we see that the CPM for this video was $1.60, which is really pretty low.
What she is doing here is amazing because she is completely focusing on unit economics. She is looking at each video, she has full knowledge of the amount of specific revenue each one made, and because of that she has noticed a lot of weird and useful things. She noticed that a video with 1.3 million views made $2,035, while another video with 2.2 million views only made $743. Now, that's crazy. A video with fewer views made more money than a video with more views. So she started to look into understanding why, and she quickly discovered that it was because of two critical things. First of all, the reason one of the videos made much less money was because it was too short, which caused it to have too few ad blocks. And this severely crippled her revenue. And secondly, it was because that a very large part of her audience for the second video was coming from markets that were much less valuable to her. With this simple knowledge, she is now able to adjust her strategy. She can adjust her editorial focus to center it around people or markets that make more sense to her, and she can make the videos longer to make sure she doesn't limit her ad revenue. This is what it means to do unit economics and unit analytics. Compare this, for instance, to what we usually hear from traditional publishers. How many times, for instance, have you heard a publisher say that they need to make videos shorter to reach young people? How many times have you seen a publisher launch something new that is based on this line of thinking? For instance, just a few weeks ago, CBS News announced a new partnership with a company called Quibi to create a short 6-minute video of their show 60 Minutes. Consider what I just told you. This is insane, right? This completely contradicts what we know about unit analytics. And if CBS News were to contact Shelby and ask her to analyze their strategy, she would tell them that they were idiots. What CBS News has done is to cut their potential ad income in half by making the videos too short. This is a terrible strategy, and it's not the only mistake they made with this. But the reason why so many publishers think this way is because they don't understand unit economics. Unit economics is one of the most useful and the most strategic assets that you can possibly have. It's something everyone should use every day, and it should be an integrated part of the tools that journalists and editors use to decide how to create more relevant and more valuable news. Now, obviously, there are also a lot of problems with this. One of the many reasons why so many media people don't like this is because it has a tendency to drive journalism in the wrong direction. This is particularly the case when we talk about vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are all those metrics that make people feel good, but don't actually reflect on any real value, and they are often massively misleading. Some of the worst examples of this is when publishers start to measure likes as unit analytics. Likes are terrible because not only are they very easy to inflate using simple tactics, they are focusing on the wrong form of value. A like is an emotion. When you ask people whether they like something, you are essentially asking them to just react with their most basic feelings. And the reality is often that people might like something that has no real value and dislike something that is actually incredibly useful for them to know. Take a simple example like, say, a car accident that has caused a very important local road to be closed for 6 hours. And then imagine that in a news article you have a like and a dislike button. What would happen? Well, most people would press the dislike button, partly because it's a very sad story, but also because they are annoyed that this road is closed, which will come as a great inconvenience to many people. In other words, people will react to that story with dislike. But the message of this news article, being that this very important road that people are likely to use on their way home will be closed, that information is extremely valuable to them. So likes and dislikes are terrible as unit metrics because they don't represent the value of things. They only measure how people react to something. Another common mistake that we often see is the use of averages. Averages are terrible because they have a tendency to hide what is really going on. When you use averages, you make the worst articles look better and the best articles look worse. Take the example from before of the YouTuber. She mentioned 2 videos, one with 1.3 million views, making $2,035, and another with 2.2 million views, making only $733. Think about what would happen if you instead measure that as an average. Then both of these articles would have 1.75 million views on average, and they would both make $1,389, again on average. This is completely useless, but more so, it's misleading. So do not ever use averages to measure unit economics. Instead, when you do unit economics, it's essential that you measure the direct impact for that specific unit. Anything else is likely to mislead you. There are many other metrics that have similar problems. Page views, for instance, is another metric that has caused tremendous damage to the industry. Because again, page views don't really measure value. The problem is the same as before. People have a tendency to look at and engage with a lot of content that doesn't really have any value to them, simply because they are reacting to your headlines. But many of these articles usually don't drive the correct result. This is particularly true when it comes to subscription value, but it's also often true with advertising. In the media world, we often say that publishers should focus on page view because of advertising, and that is true if you think about advertising in its lowest and least valuable form. For instance, if you are a publisher and you sell your advertising space purely on reach, then yes, more page views equals more reach, which in turn equals more money. But this is only true for the lowest form of advertising. If you start to look at higher forms of ad revenue, where, for instance, you measure the result in terms of clicks, installs, email signups, or other actions, you see the same effect that the page views and the actions don't necessarily align. The articles that drive the most page views often don't drive that many advertising actions. They're good for reach, but not for activity. So again, when we talk about unit economics, it's really important that we understand what true value is. When you want to measure which articles that deliver the best value for brands, you need to be really careful about what ad metrics that you are actually looking at. Another problem that relates to this is the problem with how scams and fraud has an influence on unit economics, particularly around advertising. It is well known that the advertising industry, including what we do in the publishing industry, is largely just one big scam. Some of it is external, where parts of the ad tech ecosystem is fraudulent, but a lot of it is internal. And the reason why we have this problem is because of how badly we measure advertising. But I want to illustrate just how terrible and how much of a scam that we are actually dealing with. To do this, I will now play you an ad. Now, mind you, this ad is just a random ad that I found. It's from 2010. This ad has no relationship with this podcast, nor is this podcast sponsored in any way, but it's just a good example. So here is the ad in full. And please listen to the whole thing because this will be important in a second.
Welcome back to the King Value Radio Network. I'm your host, Sandy.
And I'm your other host, Carl. Sandy, we are getting loads of calls today about the fresh new $1 double crispy cheesy burger.
Well, hello. With 2 flame-broiled patties, crispy onions, and cheesy sauce for only $1, that's no surprise.
Jim from Tucson, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi guys. I just want to say I took your advice, went to Burger King, I got a new double crispy cheesy burger for $1. I couldn't be happier.
Oh, congratulations. Say, Jim, what was your favorite part of the delicious new double crispy cheesy burger? The flame fresh taste?
Well, I'll tell you, it had 2 big flame-broiled patties, plus it had crispy onions and cheesy sauce too. It was really delicious.
Oh, don't forget the price, Jim.
Oh yeah, and it only cost $1. It's probably the best purchase I ever made.
Probably, Jim.
Okay, definitely.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Get the new double crispy cheesy burger with double the flame fresh taste.
Now, we can have a long discussion about whether this is a good or a bad ad, but I think we can agree that the next time you are walking down the street and you see a Burger King, you might remember it and decide to buy something. Here's the problem though. This full ad that you just heard does not represent how we measure advertising. Instead, the way publishers and the ad industry measure this is by using the IAB standard that only 50% of an ad should be in view for only 2 seconds. What that means is that you measure this.
Sandy, we are getting loads of calls today.
That's it. What you just heard was 2 seconds of this ad. This is what the IAB defines as an ad view. This is what publishers use, and it's what brands have to pay for. Of course, it's not just publishers who use this. Everyone uses this. Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, Reddit, and Twitter all use this standard. And it's a total scam. There is no value of any kind. And this whole thing is the result of an industry that has sunk so low that everyone is now a part of it. It's just shameful beyond belief. Of course, there are also slightly better models out there. For instance, Facebook also have a 3-second ad view model. So let's listen to that.
Sandy, we are getting loads of calls today about the fresh new...
That was 3 seconds. It was slightly longer, but I think we can all agree that this is still a total scam. I do not understand why any brand anywhere would ever pay for this. But more importantly, I feel embarrassed to know that this is also what we do in the media industry. Any ad view based on 2, 3, or even 5 seconds are not actual views. In order to get real views, we need to look at what is called a true view. On Facebook, for instance, this means that an ad is only counted when it has played all the way to the end, or whenever it exceeds 15 seconds, whichever comes first. And as of May 2019, this metric has become the new standard for Facebook. True views are somewhat better. It sounds like this.
Sandy, we are getting loads of calls today about the fresh new $1 double crispy cheesy burger.
Well, hello. With 2 flame-broiled patties, crispy onions, and cheesy sauce for only $1, that's no surprise.
Jim from Tucson, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi guys. I just want to say I took your advice.
I mean, it still doesn't even come close to delivering the actual ad, but at least we now know what brand the ad is about. YouTube, however, is a lot better. It defines a true view as when people either engage with an ad, which would be very valuable, or when the ad has played for at least 30 seconds. Now, the ad sounds like this.
Sandy, we are getting loads of calls today about the fresh new $1 double crispy cheesy burger.
Well, hello. With 2 flame-broiled patties, crispy onions, and cheesy sauce for only $1, that's no surprise.
Jim from Tucson, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi guys. I just want to say I took your advice. Went to Burger King. I got a new double crispy cheesy burger for $1. I couldn't be happier.
Oh, congratulations! Say, Jim, what was your favorite part of the delicious new double crispy cheesy burger? The flame fresh taste?
Well, I'll tell you, it had 2 big flame-broiled patties.
At this point, we actually reach enough time to reasonably assume that people can remember it, even if they didn't hear it all the way to the end. 30 seconds is enough time for people to create the connection so that the next time they see a Burger King, this ad might have an effect on whether they go in to buy something. But think about all of this. This is obviously an important problem and something we should fix in the industry. But to stay on topic, think about it in relation to unit analytics. If you are a publisher and you want to use unit analytics to identify what articles actually work, which one of the metrics that I just talked about would you focus on? The answer is obvious. You would want to focus on the YouTube TrueView metric of 30 seconds. That is the metric that gives you the best indication of value, and it's the metric that you can use to define your focus in a way that will give you an edge in the future. The other metrics are just crap, and the IAB metric is just a scam. You would never want to use those in your internal unit analytics. It's bad enough that these are used to scam advertisers, but you wouldn't use them to scam yourself. So this is another thing to be mindful about. You need to look deeply into the actual value of the metrics that you use. Unit economics and unit analytics can be really powerful, but only if you use them well. Of course, it's one thing to talk about the metrics where you have to be very clear about what you pick to define the right value, but there are other metrics that don't really work with unit economics and unit analytics. One area where unit analytics and unit economics really struggle is when the interactions that we want to learn about is not defined by a single unit. For publishers, there are two really big ones. One is the subscription rate and just generally trying to understand what caused people to subscribe. And the other one is the churn rate and trying to figure out why people would leave. For both of these metrics, it is incredibly rare that a single article or a single video is so good that it is the only reason why people subscribe. Almost always, the process of getting people to subscribe is a very long-term event, spanning months or even years. I had a discussion about this recently in relation to newspapers and their subscription rates. If you take a newspaper like the New York Times and you look at their growth in subscribers, how would you attribute this? What caused this to happen? The answer is that it's not a single article. In fact, everyone who chooses to subscribe to the New York Times today will have known about it for years. They are likely to have come across articles from the New York Times in some form or another, maybe 1,000 times before. They might have friends who already subscribe. They might have heard about it in relation to other things. So you can't attribute that to any single article. For churn, it's kind of the same thing. Usually, the people who churn do so because they didn't feel the value was good enough, and they've had that feeling for a long time. Sure, sometimes things happen that cause people to get so angry that they leave there and then. There was an example of this a few months ago where the New York Times wrote about something that a lot of people were very angry about. I can't remember what the exact article was about anymore, but even in those cases, people are unlikely to cancel their subscription unless something else has pushed them in that direction as well. Also, in relation to churn, the thing that pushes people to cancel may not be the last article that they see. To give you an example, imagine that a subscriber to the New York Times comes across an article that makes them so angry that they are considering canceling their subscription. Most people don't actually do it at that precise moment. Instead, they might spend the next couple of days thinking that over, during which time they will read other articles. In other words, the attribution that you define as the point of churn might no longer show up, and instead you end up attributing this to another article that was actually not that bad. It just happened to be something people read afterwards. So unit economics and unit analytics don't work when you have a metric that is defined by momentum over time. So these are some of the things that you should be very mindful of. But the next question is, what should you put in it? What kind of metrics actually do work with unit economics? Well, the first thing I want you to do is to not think about this as a dashboard. When most publishers think about measuring individual articles in a better way, they are still just thinking about it as a dashboard. We have even seen some publishers create very fancy graphic interfaces that they can then display on a big screen that is hanging somewhere in the middle of a newsroom. I don't want you to do this when dealing with unit economics. There are times when a dashboard is useful, but this isn't one of them. What I want you to do instead is to think about this as a tool, something you use as part of your work, as part of your journalistic planning, and as part of other useful things that you're trying to do. In other words, instead of thinking of unit economics and unit analytics as part of your analytics system, think about it as data that you can integrate into the rest of your organization. Let me give you a few ideas. We will start by talking about something that people in newsrooms don't really want to focus on, which is money. As I mentioned in the very beginning, one of the things that we can do with unit economics is to identify and attribute the exact amount of revenue each article generates. So here's a question. What is the opposite of revenue? Well, obviously it's cost. Okay, so why don't we add that into this as well? What I mean is, imagine if you had a tool that tracked both the cost and the revenue for every single article. Think about how useful that would be in order to identify why a publisher might not be profitable. Also, over the past several years, we've seen many studies from inside different publishers where they have been really surprised by the disconnect between what their audience was reading and what their journalists were focusing on. We have also seen many examples of publishers cutting down on the number of articles that they publish each day with no effect, meaning that all those were basically just wasted resources. All of this is something these publishers could identify much earlier if they've just used unit economics in this type of way. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. As soon as I started talking about defining the success of journalistic articles based on their cost versus revenue, a lot of you were thinking that this would be the worst thing ever. Some might say that it might mean that good but expensive articles wouldn't be written, and you might think that this would be just another way to drive journalism down the wrong path. And I understand that reaction. But again, remember what I said in the beginning. It is absolutely vital that the metrics that you choose represent the highest form of value, and also that this value is an accurate reflection of your aim as a publisher. And I agree that if you pick the wrong revenue metrics to define your journalism, it will have a very bad impact on your editorial strategy. But this is not what I'm talking about here. Let me give you 3 examples of articles, and let's talk about what the right revenue metric is for each of them. We will start with a hard news story. Imagine that you are a local newspaper and you've written a number of very important investigative stories uncovering corruption within your local city council. These are high-end type of journalistic stories. Stories like this are the reason we need local newspapers. So think about this in relation to revenue. Again, we have 2 types of revenue. We have advertising revenue and subscriber revenue. Which one of these would represent the value of a hard news investigative article? Well, advertising revenue doesn't really make much sense. Stories focusing on uncovering local council corruption are not really that brand friendly. And people are not going to read those and think, yes, I should buy a new bicycle. So from an advertising perspective, hard news stories like this will never really perform that well. Instead, these types of stories are really about how big an impact we have on our most important readers, meaning our subscribers. Was this story something the public considered to be worth reading and spending time on? The answer, of course, is yes. So we need to measure the revenue from these articles based on how big an impact it had on our subscribers. And the best way to do that is to attribute the subscriber revenue per article based on either time spent or the subscriber read rates of those stories. This would be the best monetary representation of how good your journalism really was, right? The second example of an article is a review of a new car. This is a story that would work well with advertising because reviews generally are very brand friendly. Also, since it's a review, it's very important that your subscribers consider it to be valuable and informative to them as well. So in this, we can look at both advertising revenue and the subscriber revenue as a very strong indication of how valuable that article was. If people didn't like it, they are also less likely to interact with the ads and spend less time on it. But if they did like it, it would probably also reflect on the advertising engagement, and it would definitely be noticeable when comparing read rates and time spent. So here we can use both revenue metrics as a very strong indicator of good journalistic result. The third type of article is all the smaller and much quicker snack articles. There are a million different forms of this. It could be a sport article where you're just making a quick announcement or something else. In this case, because the article is so short, it doesn't bring much value to your subscribers. I mean, they look at it, but it is such a short glimpse of time that it would never take up much of a share of the overall subscriber revenue. However, again, if people liked the information and it generated a positive result, it would reflect on the advertising rates. So for a quick article, you would focus much more on just the advertising revenue and much less on the subscriber revenue as an indicator of how well that article performed. Now, think about this. Here we have 3 very different articles, and it's your editorial focus that defines which part of your revenue mix that is responsible for defining whether that is a success or not. And once you start to think about it this way, you very quickly realize how powerful a tool this really is in defining your journalistic success. If you write an important investigative story, but it doesn't generate any real attention from your subscribers, then it wasn't relevant to people. So defining your unit economics and unit analytics this way is just amazing. It completely transforms the way you think about your journalistic success, and it centers and focuses everyone in the newsroom in ways that normal analytics would never be able to do. And this was just one example of how you could turn unit analytics into a tool that you actually use every single day, and one that helps you plan and define your editorial focus. Now think about all the other tools that you could potentially create. What about a tool linked to your audience engagement efforts? Well, we would approach this in the same way. We would look at what type of activity we are doing, then we would identify which part of our revenue mix or other factors that would define the success of each thing that we put out. And again, we end up with a tool that you will bring to every single planning meeting, and a tool that you would check every day to make sure things are going the way you want it to. This is a very critical skill for newsrooms to embrace. And as I said earlier, this is normal for YouTubers. Every YouTuber has to learn this if they want to bring their channel to the next level. And so this is also a skill that we need to learn in the rest of the media industry. It is incredibly important. But be mindful of what metrics you focus on, and also don't try to fit it into everything. Unit economics and unit analytics is a very specific tool, but when used right, it can make an incredible difference. So I hope this podcast was useful to you, and I hope I have now made you excited about diving into this. Anyway, as always, remember to share the podcast, and if you are not already a Plus subscriber, please consider subscribing. It's only $9 a month, and you get articles, reports, podcasts like this, full of useful information that you can use to make a difference. Everything I do is funded by my subscribers, and thanks to you for making it all possible. But until next time, as always, thank you for listening.
Something was wrong. Here I was dreaming we got along so perfectly and wordlessly. Had I been there some of the time, I would have seen all of the signs of our fault. I'm sorry, but we had something real, a bit of you, a bit of me. And now I'm swimming through to everyone I know. Buy me a drink and help me let go of the suffering. Oh, help me get back again. 'Cause we had love enough.